Hello and welcome to the EPMA webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Intro to Managing Agile Projects with Microsoft Project. I'll be your host today. My name is Todd Meyer and I'm a Director of Development and Integration here at EPMA. I'm also a Senior EPM Consultant and a founding member of EPMA. If you like, find our company on LinkedIn, you can follow our Twitter feed, and even like our Facebook page. I'm also on LinkedIn, so I'd encourage you to look me up and link with me. We are located in Houston, Texas, along the Gulf Coast, and we offer our services to companies throughout the United States and beyond. Some of our services, we offer PPM consulting and solutions implementations. We have project management as a service, referenced as PMAS. We do offer a complete spectrum of training around PPM, and we have world-class awesome support for the tool sets. We offer private clouds for project server hosting, and we perform extensive custom development integration services for our clients as well. Our flagship product is called PPMX. It's an enterprise solution that is based on Microsoft Project Server, but significantly enhances its reporting capabilities and its user experience. I would encourage you to find us and seek out some more information on that. It's cool stuff. EPMA has accomplished many things in its 6+ years of existence, including the Microsoft Gold PPM competency. We've published a few Microsoft-related PPM books. We've achieved Best Companies in Texas to Work For award, as well as the Inc. 5000's America's Fastest Growing Private Companies Award. Like I said earlier, please visit our website where you can find many useful items. Among them, we have free Microsoft Project and Project Server Quick Reference cards. These are downloadable. We have articles and tips on our blog. We list out our formal training offerings for you, and we even have a schedule of our upcoming webinars and events. So this webinar today is going to be a little less than an hour long, but we do have a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to move through some slides a little bit more quickly than others. But to start off, I'm going to offer some high-level Agile methodology fundamentals, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, but especially for those in the audience who may be new to Agile. And then we'll spend some time in an actual Microsoft project schedule for a live demo for just one suggested form of Agile schedule management using the tool. But for those of you who may find my initial overview a bit of a review, just please bear with us. Like I said, it's a general intro to Microsoft Agile project management, and we're going to be using Microsoft Project to manage this particular Agile project. I'm going to assume that you guys have a little bit of experience using Microsoft Project to plan, more traditional schedules. And I'm also going to assume that you have an understanding of or are looking to be introduced to some of the basic Agile project management principles that we're hearing about these days. This demonstration just uses one single suggested method of managing a project using Agile methodologies. You may have seen others on the web, or you may have other ideas of your own, and that's okay. Alright, let's get this Agile party started. So Agile can be thought of as an umbrella term for iterative, incremental software or product development methodologies. And some of these include extreme programming, which is commonly referenced by its acronym XP. There's also Scrum, there's Lean, and there's feature-driven development, which you'll also hear referenced as FDD. So Agile arose in opposition to the traditional phase-driven waterfall development method, which, and this is quite a lot, emphasizes top-down project management with big design effort up front. It has extensive use of formalized documentation and working operational silos for architecture and design phases for coding, building, and then finally testing and rework before the scheduled product launch. Agile arose in opposition to the traditional phase-driven waterfall development method, which, and this is quite a mouthful, it emphasizes a top-down project management with a big design effort up front, extensive use of formalized documentation, and working operational silos for architecture and design. It has phases for coding or building, And finally, phases for testing and rework that are going to occur just before the scheduled product launch, deployment, or some other formalized completion for the project. Agile methodologies share an emphasis on small teams delivering small increments of working software or product updates with great frequency, while both working in close collaboration with the customer and constantly adapting to changing or evolving requirements. Agile wants to release the entire team, the client or the sponsor, the PM, the analysts, the engineers, the developers, etc., from the rigid confines of that typical upfront planned phased schedule approach. It allows the Agile team to determine what needs to be done and when. It also dictates that the team should balance their order of execution for only the efforts with the most value to the project, against the team's proven capability to deliver completed bits of work. Agile methodologies minimize the overall project risk by shortening the release cycles and promoting a continuous feedback loop. And this allows scope change to be embraced well before it becomes detrimental to the overall project vision. It also provides the customer with a usable piece of software or some product enhancement or update early and often. Here are some of the many documented benefits touted by Agile project management methodologies. I'm not going to bore you with detail for each of those, as they are easily available from any number of online or in-print sources, but I would, however, encourage you to perform some additional research on your own to fill in any gaps. The Agile cycle. So this familiar graphic, I'm sure you've seen some variation of it, describes a simplified version of a complete and repetitive Agile cycle. We're going to start with a planning meeting, which in my particular diagram looks like faceless robots sitting at a table eating paper, where the whole Agile team discusses at a high level what they'd like to get done or what they'd like to get built. This discussion builds up the sprint backlog, which is essentially a storage queue for high-level defined upcoming work. There's some backlog prioritization going on in this meeting, I'm sure, as well. During a second meeting, sprint backlog items are analyzed, additional details are discussed, and these items are going to be broken down into more granular pieces. They're going to be estimated, they're going to be prioritized, and they're going to be selected for inclusion into sprints. Now, sprints are essentially mini projects, which are typically time boxed as 2, 3, or 4 week duration. And during this rigid time frame, all the backlog items chosen to be fulfilled within the sprint are going to be completed. And this is going to produce what is termed a potentially shippable product. In terms of software, an Agile team may be working on a reporting module to be added to an accounting system. They're not necessarily delivering the entire system, but rather, some piece of finite usable value to that system. In non-software terms, maybe the team is redesigning just like an exhaust manifold for a particular line of an industrial engine. It's not the entire engine, it's just an enhancement to it. But at completion, both of these scenarios, what's delivered can be considered a potentially shippable product. All right, then in the final meeting, the team reflects on what worked during the process, what didn't work, and what can be improved on. Constantly looking for improvement of their process. Now, once this is done, we rinse and repeat, so to speak, and the cycle begins again. So for our demonstration today, we're going to be focusing on just this section of the cycle. We're going to be crafting our schedule to allow us to plan and track the backlog, our sprints, and our user stories through to a completed, potentially shippable product or product increment. We're going to refer to these now granularized backlog items that get moved into the sprints as user stories, although some Agile teams are going to refer to these as features. Our demonstration, we're going to say user stories. Regardless, they mean the same thing, and they describe a definable, producible portion of the product, whether it be software or not, or the product enhancement that's going to be delivered by the end of the sprint. But like I said, for the sake of time, I'm going to refrain from including all the planning meetings in my demo schedule, although once you master the mechanics of your schedule, you may want to include these meetings in your actual plan. Anyway, but they are important. You do need to have the meetings. It's the only way your team will continually improve. So, user story or feature estimating. This is what I'm going to describe here. In an agile team, we estimate our efforts a little bit differently than we would in a traditional waterfall scheduling scenario. Meaning, we're actually going to use a relative scale, such as this t-shirt sizing, or we're going to use a user story point system rather than planned hours. Now, studies have shown that we as human beings are just simply better at estimating in relative terms than we are in estimating using finite terms. For example, it's easier and over time and repetition actually proven to be more accurate for us to say that if we're doing a report, we can say this report will easily take me twice as long to produce as the last report that we did, or that's a medium-sized effort for our team. And this is in quite contrast to saying it's going to take me 82 and a half hours to write the code, design the report output, test, and deploy. Leaves a lot of room for significant error. So Agile plays directly to our strengths as humans, and we use relative sizing for all of the efforts. Similarly, if we use a point system to describe each individual backlog item in terms of its relative sizing, and we keep this rating system completely consistent for all of our backlog item effort estimating, then we can actually sum up the total points of completed user stories that we accomplish within our sprints, and we can arrive at an average total point amount per sprint. And this average total point amount per sprint that we continually arrive at, this becomes what is called our team's velocity. You'll hear that term. So to put it another way, velocity is just a measure of how we, as a team, can successfully accomplish within any given sprint of equal duration. So we simply adhere to this velocity, which is basically our capacity or our speed limit for our sprint planning, for planning the workloads that we accomplish within our sprints. So in our Microsoft project schedule, which is an hourly based effort or an hourly effort based tool, it will be quite helpful to have some mechanism so that we can translate our relative sizing designations into these work hours. Again, we have to do this because the Microsoft project scheduling engine thinks in terms of hours for work and its duration calculation. It doesn't think in terms of small, medium, or large, or in 1, 2, 3, 0, whatever. But don't worry, I'm gonna show you how to make this easy inside the tool. So in the demo that I show you from the tool, I'm going to show you how to use both the t-shirt sizing method and a story point sizing method to help you as the PM accommodate planning so you can match your team's estimations. This chart is going to explain how my team has designed the correlation between t-shirt sizing and story points and hours. So notice how my t-shirt sizes are paired with points, and my points I've equated to hours. Basically, each point represents one day, which is then quite easily to translate into hours for planning within Microsoft Project. But don't worry, if this is a little cloudy right now, hopefully the demo will bring the sun out for you and bring this into clearer focus. So in crafting this Microsoft Project schedule, we're going to need to make sure that we have made it easy for us to have these mechanisms that accommodate the Agile concepts. So we're obviously not going to want to organize our schedule to match an Agile. We're obviously going to want to. All right, replay. We're obviously going to want to organize our schedule to match an Agile concept. One more time. We're obviously going to want to organize our schedule to match an Agile conceptual model, and we certainly can't use sticky notes with Microsoft Project. So as you're going to see, we are going to be able to easily organize our sprints and our user stories. As mentioned before, we're going to assign story point designations. We're going to assign t-shirt sizes. We're actually going to do both to our user stories. So that we'll be able to schedule and manage our sprints, keeping in line with the team's stated velocity. Which again, velocity is just the sum of the story points that a team can consistently complete within a single sprint, be it 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. And finally, we're also going to be able to easily move items from our backlog and into our sprints. We're going to do all this inside the schedule. All right. Well, enough of my blabbing over PowerPoint slides. Let's go ahead and flip over to a Microsoft project, and we will begin the Agile demo. Okay. So I've already put some preliminary scheduling together, and it's here just to get us started. But I want you to notice how there's some sort of basic organization here. I have the top portion of the schedule reserved for my sprints, and I have the lower portion for my backlog items. You can see that there are tasks, which are named as numbered user stories. And I also have numbered sprints. So you can see my sprint number 1, sprint number 2, number 3, and so on, 4, 5, and 6 that don't have any user stories at this time. I've got summary tasks that I just went over. These summary tasks, all right, we're going to start this whole section over. So you can see that some preliminary scheduling has already been performed for us here to get us started. And notice how there is obviously some minor organization. I have the top portion of the schedule for the sprints and the lower portion for the backlog items. You'll see that I have tasks, I have named and numbered sprints, and named and numbered user stories as well. Now, your user stories, or if you choose to call them features or whatever, they'll likely have a little bit more descriptive names than mine do. I've just kind of kept it simple for the demo. So just kind of to match the sticky notes that I had in one of the previous slides. But I would expect that instead of you calling it user story 10 or user story 6, it would actually be some descriptive verbiage that describes the task or feature that you're going to be completing. So notice that I've also got some summary tasks, and I'm using a single summary task to group my backlog, and I'm using a single summary task to group my sprints also. One thing that you may notice, some of you that are a little more seasoned Microsoft project schedulers, that I have set the constraint type for all of my tasks to finish as late as possible, or start as late as possible. I'm going to default my new task this way because I really don't know yet when my task will actually occur. The timing is going to be completely determined by my Agile team. But I know that they'll not be worked on as soon as possible, but rather they're going to be worked on according to some predetermined priority. And I can reflect this order of priority in my schedule once it has been determined. I'm going to show you how to do that too. This view is pretty poor as it is, so to help me with my scheduling, I've actually created a custom view which I've called Agile Entry. I'm going to switch to that now. Alright. So you can see this one has a lot more information in it. I've even done some color coding to help me out with my organization, my visual organization rather. But let's talk about some of the fields that I have in here. So I'm going to just go kind of from left to right, and we'll talk about these. In my first column, I have a field called Sprint. Now, this is what's going to be used to designate what my tasks currently are. So I have an opportunity to designate which sprint these are going to fall into. And this doesn't really necessarily have any play in my scheduling, but if I'm going to do any reporting at any time, this might come in handy. I have my story priority, and this is where I have an opportunity to organize the order of prioritization that we're going to perform my sprints. My user stories within my sprints. And I've stored these in values as high, medium, and low, and these are going to again, help me with my order of execution. I put a number in front of these inside my custom field so that I could actually use them to sort. For instance, if my sorting was already out of sorts, then all I would need to do is simply come to my column here, click on my down arrow, and say sort from A to Z, and then everything is sorted in order of priority. Quick and easy, and it didn't move my tasks between my sprints, so that's nice as well. Okay, moving along, I've got a column here called activity size. This is where I can designate my relative sizing. You may or may not use this, but I have used it, and I've got formulas in the background that match how we described it. Okay, I've got activity size here. These correspond to the t-shirt sizing method, and these can be easily used to translate my story points into story work. Now the story points, I've got a custom here, and to drive consistency, I'm actually using a formula for this custom field that uses whatever has been selected as the activity size prior to it to calculate the number of points. We got to do that over. Okay, I've got a number of custom fields configured for use in this particular view. So I'm going to go over them from left to right. The first column, I have a custom field called sprint. And this is going to store values such as backlog or what number of sprint that the user story belongs to. And these are actually going to be they don't really help you with your scheduling per se, but oftentimes you're going to want to be able to tag your tasks so that you can use them for reporting, such as like burn down reporting, for instance. In my next custom column, I have a field called story priority, and this stores values such as high, medium, and low, and these are going to help me determine, or I'm going to use this so that I can execute my user stories in the optimum order so that the higher valued user stories are performed first. And just a little bit about that, you'll notice that I have ones, twos, and threes in front of these, and this is simply so that I can allow the sorting mechanism inside Microsoft Project to place these in the order for me. So for instance, let me shuffle some of these around. Alright, I'm just simply selecting a row and then dragging it to another position. Okay, so now you can see that my priorities are all out of whack. And if that's the case, I can now simply come here and select the column and choose to allow the column to do the sorting for me. And because of the numbers, it puts everything in the order that I need. So now within each sprint, regardless of what that user story is, I have guaranteed that my order of execution is such that the higher priority items are going to be attacked first. Great. Okay, activity size. This custom field may or may not be one that you guys use, but I'm going to include it here simply to show you how the t-shirt sizing method can be easily used to translate into story points or story work. So this is just simply, a drop down where we've got our extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and double XL. Okay. For my story points, to drive consistency, I'm actually using a formula for this custom field that uses the selected activity size value to display the corresponding story point value. I'll show you how this works. But basically, this is a formula behind the scenes where, if you remember from the presentation, I had a table that dictated if what my medium correlates to in terms of story points. So all that's done in a formula behind the scenes. So for this medium one here, if I change this to large, its story points should increase from 5 to 10, just like that. You'll notice that not only did my story points change, but my story work as well. So this custom field is driven by a formula also, obviously, and it's used to translate story points into work hours, and this is going to help the PM keep the activities being tackled during a sprint time box within that sprint's duration. Now, again, keep in mind that Microsoft Project doesn't allow you to put formulas into its built-in fields, such as the work field. So this is why I've had to create a formula-based field called story work and do the calculations there. But once that story work field becomes updated according to what my activity size is or my story points, if I'm going to not use both of them, then I can use this number to dictate what it's going to, what I'm going to put on that task in terms of hours when I'm doing my planning. Okay, I'm just going to hit Control Z and back out of the change that I just made on user story number 9. All right, let's talk a little bit about organization. I want you to see that you'll notice that I have some linking here within my schedule, and I've done this linking to ensure that my sprints are going to be driven in successive order, meaning sprint number 1 is going to be followed by sprint number 2, which is going to be followed by sprint number 3, etc. And if I pull this over, you see my successors here. I've actually got them here. Now, one thing that you'll notice that I'm doing is I'm actually linking my summary tasks. Now, I understand that linking summary tasks goes it's a little contrary to waterfall scheduling best practices, but keep in mind that we've totally switched mindsets from waterfall to agile, and therefore some of these things may feel a little bit against the grain until you get used to them in practice. But again, I've linked these summary tasks because my user stories are going to come and go, and the user stories being the task within each sprint. So in a normal waterfall, you would link the last task in a grouping with the first task in a subsequent grouping. But in Agile methodology, remember we talked about how we're going to reprioritize pretty consistently. So some of these tasks are going to be moved around, and but my sprints are not. They're static. So linking the summaries is going to prevent me from having to consistently manage linkages between tasks that, like I said, are may jump from sprint to sprint, or they may even fall back into the backlog. I don't know, but I'm not going to have to worry about that because none of my tasks are going to be linked in that manner. Speaking of the backlog, you'll notice I've got a backlog section down here below my sprints, and this is where we store our user stories that have been discussed by the team but have not yet been assigned to a sprint. Okay. All right. Notice how each sprint, as well as my backlog, roll up my total story points and my total estimated story work. So in this particular sprint, I've got 20. This particular sprint rolls up to 20. This one rolls up to 20. And my corresponding hours do as well. And I can obviously look at my backlog and quickly and easily understand that I have a total of 74 story points in my backlog, which equates to about 592 hours. In in my work column, you're going to notice that some of these don't add up to, there's no work here. I've got some story work here, but there is no work in my work column. no hours. That's because I haven't actually made the assignments yet. You'll notice that over here I've got my assignees in, and once you make an assignment, once you add a resource to a task, that's when the work hours are become visible for us. Okay, so let's talk about these generic resources that I have here. Let me pull this over so we have a little bit more real estate. So you'll see that I have these resources, like I said, assigned to my first couple of sprints. I'm using generic resource for the schedule just to keep it simple, although normally I would expect to see actual named resources for these tasks. But because my sprint team members, got to start over. You'll notice I'm using generic resources for the schedule to keep it simple, but I normally expect to see actual named resources for these tasks because my sprint team members are very much known entities. So now I want to demonstrate some of the mechanics of this simple Agile-based project schedule. We're going to assume that my Agile team has a velocity of 20 story points per sprint. And I'll show you how to add resources to the user stories in sprint number 3. We're going to add user stories from the backlog to sprint number 4. And I'll organize my sprint work so that I've already organized my sprint work so that the higher prioritized activities are performed first. I'll probably need to do that again with sprint number 4. And finally, I'll resolve my overallocations and ensure that my sprints are as close to a month in duration as possible given the selected user stories. Okay, so let's add some people to this particular sprint. So I'm going to show the split, and I am going to add some individuals. To this particular task. Wait a minute. I did that wrong. You need to cut that out. Okay, so let's add some resources and plan my sprint number 3. So I'm going to show the split to do my work here, and I'm going to use the calculated values that my custom fields are currently displaying. So what this tells me is that this particular user story, number 1, is an extra large and has a 15 story point designation, giving us 120 hours. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this 120 hours and I'm going to put 120 hours there. And now I'm going to assign some resources. I'm going to assign a .NET developer and a business analyst. I'm going to put each of these guys at 50% on this. And I'm going to click OK. So you'll notice that I have now got a total duration of 120 hours. My work is 120 hours, and it absolutely clearly matches what my story point designation was. Okay, let's do user story number 5. This has a story work of 40 hours, so I'm going to put in my 40 hours, and I am going to assign a JavaScript developer and a business analyst. So I'm going to put this business analyst or the JavaScript at 80%. I'll put my BA at 20% and click OK. So now I've got a 40-hour story work designation, which matches my duration and my work for 40 hours. So you'll also notice that all this rolls up to 160 hours, which is exactly what I would expect. Okay, so number 4. I don't have anything listed in number 4, so let's pull a few items. Now, we've got a velocity for my team, obviously, of 20, so I need to make sure that anything that I take up there is going to stay within that velocity. So I'm going to make this pretty simple for us, and I am going to pick this item here. We'll just simply drag and drop, and we've got 10, so I need another 10. So we've got 5, 8, 9, 10. I could take all of these guys and move them as well. They're already prioritized. If they weren't, I could obviously have resorted them, but they are what they are, from medium to low. And now I could go through here and do my resource assignments just like I did them in sprint number 3. So I'm only going to do the first one. So let's bring this up. So this has a story points of 10 hours, or excuse me, story work of 80 hours. Okay, so you will notice that I do not have a roll-up here for my story points or my story work. And that is simply because these user stories are not yet indented into my sprint number 4. So I'm going to select all of these and use this super cool little feature here to quickly move them over. Alright, now I have a roll-up. I've got a roll-up just what I had expected, to a total of 20 points, to a total story work of 160. So let's begin to add resources. Now I'm only going to do the resources for the first one here. So the first thing I want to do is I have 80 hours of story work. So I want to put my 80 hours there. And now I will begin to assign my resources. And OK. There we go. 80 hours, 80 hours, 80 hours. Alright, so I think we get the concept. Okay, now one thing that you also are going to know is you're going to understand that I've got some over allocations here. And I've got some over allocations because these are all starting on the same day. But that may not be exactly how that work gets done. I mean, we still do work in a real world where, things have to happen in some type of an order of execution. We still have to plan for our resources work. We don't start all of our tasks on the same day and expect to finish them. So, within each user story, I am going to link my tasks by selecting all of my tasks and then coming up to the schedule section of the ribbon and clicking the link tasks button. So what this is going to do, if I pull my vertical slider over, is this is going to show that I am going to start on the 14th and finish on the 12th now. So all of these are going to follow some order of execution, and they should stay very closely within my allotted duration as well. So I can go ahead and do that for all of the tasks within my sprint. I'm going to skip that one since I don't have those completely planned out. But you get the idea there. So now I have my over allocations resolved. I have all of my story work still completing within my allotted story time, and I'm good to go. So additionally, if I'm a project manager using Project Server or Project Online in an enterprise scenario where I may be using resources who belong to other Agile teams, I now have much more accurate visibility into my workload and my utilization by assigning my tasks and linking them as such. All right, so we've resolved our over allocations. We have made sure that all of our user stories are contained within our sprints and that all of these totals total up to our velocity. We've demonstrated how to assign resources to our tasks. And keep in mind that if you are in a Microsoft Project Server or a Project Online enterprise scenario, you can now, with named resources rather than the generics that I've used, you can absolutely track your resource utilization just as you would any other project. We haven't really done anything to change how the tool it calculates our utilization or anything like that. We've just simply organized our schedule into manageable chunks that very closely, if not very rigidly, mirror our Agile methodologies. So if you were receiving feedback by way of timesheets or hours, we're definitely not going to want to scratch all that. We're going to start over. So that's the mechanics of the Microsoft project using Agile methodology. Scratch that too. We're not going to use that. So that's the demonstration of the mechanics of an Agile methodology. One more time. So that should demonstrate the mechanics of managing a project in Microsoft Projects. So there's a demonstration of the mechanics of managing an Agile project within Microsoft Project Server. We have organized our stories into sprints. We have accounted for our backlog items. We have accounted for our team's velocity. And we have made sure that we have not added more work than we can accomplish within a sprint to our individual sprints. We've shown you how to add resources to our user stories, and as such, because they should be named resources, not the generics like I'm showing you here, you will be able to utilize all the features of reporting. And if you're in a Microsoft Project Server environment or a Project Online environment, then you will also be able to view the utilization and the availability and capacity of all of your resources that are managed this way. So be sure and connect with us and make sure that if you have any questions that we can get those answered for you. But let's flip back over here to our schedule. Again, send us any questions that you have. Love to hear. And don't forget to visit us on our website. Look for any upcoming webinars, tips and tricks, quick reference cards, and more formalized training. Again, reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd like to thank you all for your participation, for your patience, and your interest in managing Agile projects with Microsoft Project Server. With managing Agile projects with Microsoft Project.